This is an excerpt from The Drum, A History by Matt Dean. Follow the links below to find out more or to purchase the book. Europe, the Middle Ages, 500 to 1400 CE. In the early Middle Ages, Christianity's power enabled its preferential vocal music to excel and caused instrumental advances to grind to a halt in Europe. The collapse of the Roman Empire left the continent in a state of poor literacy and lacking in advances on every level, and so the church had the greatest influence. Persia and Arabia, on the other hand, were major forces, with huge advancements in the arts and sciences. From the perspective of Europe and classical music, the most significant drums of this time were the early versions of the modern kettle drum. The Latin origin of the word kettle, catillus, translates as bowl, and such a utensil has existed as one of the earliest cooking pots. Evidence suggests that early kettle drums originated with a flat bottom, so an obvious evolution can be assumed from the primitive domestic pot drums. These could conceivably have originated in natural vegetative forms, such as a piece of gourd. By the early Middle Ages, many different regions among Persia and Arabia held their kettle drums dear. Another drum that was also popular in Persia was the dole. It was a large double-headed barrel drum used to accompany the Persian oboe sauna, and is a possible early version of the European military bass drum. The Turkish people possessed a similar, although wider and shallower frame drum called tabl Turkey or davul. Europe became much more involved in the development of the drum during the later Middle Ages, thanks to the influence of Asia, whose exotic and wonderful percussion instruments had travelled to Europe through Byzantium, which later became Constantinople and then Istanbul, North Africa, and general increased contact with Muslim cultures. The Crusades had a huge impact on this cultural diversification in Europe during the 13th century, bridging the gap between primitive drums and advanced modern classical instruments. An example of such significant drums were the nakas. The name was derived from the Arabic nakala. These were very similar to the Persian and Arabic kettle drums, except that in Europe a pair was worn suspended from the player's belt, hanging in front of his upper thigh. The appearance and location of these drums led to a slang reference applied to male testicles, still in use today. The two drums in each pair were identical diameters, around 4 to 12 inches, and both often utilised a snare running across the top of the batter head. Depiction of these drums often showed them being beaten with the matched grip. Their exact use is unclear to us, but there is evidence of a strong military use and reports of use in aristocracy for entertainment. Although Germany is considered the European home of these drums, they became popular in England by the 14th century. Another important European drum of this period was the tabor. It was also used for military as well as entertainment purposes. The tabor was slung under one arm and played with one stick in the other hand. The hand holding the drum also held a pipe, which was played simultaneously. Carvings of the pipe and tabor in Carlisle Cathedral, 1400 to 1419 CE, the 13th century font at Northleach Church, Exeter Cathedral, 1240 CE, and Beverley Minster, 1330 CE, all show what we call a match grip today. The tabor often had a single string of gut across the batter head as a snare. The resonant head sometimes had one as well. Rope tensioning was employed with the skin tucked onto a hoop, and the rope taken through the skin just above the hoop. The rope travelled in a V shape between each head, all around the drum's circumference. Leather or rope buffs at the apex could be pulled down to increase the tension of the skin by pulling the ropes tighter. These were then slackened off between planes to preserve the skin as it fluctuated according to weather conditions. The use of a rope for tensioning was not a new invention, or even a European one. The use of cords or braces attached to the heads to tighten the parchment when required is very ancient, being found in Egypt in the 2nd millennium BC. A third drum worth mentioning is the timbre, known today as the tambourine, a frame drum with metal jingles. The jingles were larger in diameter and thicker than today's version, and were sometimes accompanied by pellet bells and a snare running across the head. They had 1 or 2 membranes and may have come in square or rectangle variations, but invariably would have been too shallow to allow any means of tuning other than by applying heat, and therefore were of fixed tension. There is also pictorial evidence of large double-headed drums strapped upon the chest, much like the military bass drum that we see later. These may well have been European versions of the Arabic tabl Turkey or Persian dole. especially when considering that records were made of the ferocity of such drums beating terror into the Christian armies by the Saracens. So it is not inconceivable that Europeans adopted such a drum at this stage. During the 12th and 13th centuries, professional musicians came in the form of minstrels and waits, and as a result of these professions, surnames pertaining to their specialised instrument were formed. Many of these names survive today, such as harper, piper, horner, or the drum-related French name Tabor, whose English variants include Tabor. Waits were affiliated with a specific town and started as the town watchman, whose occasional playing of the drum proved they were awake and alert at night, as well as playing beneath windows on dark, cold mornings to coax people out of their beds. Later they took on an extra role as the town band musicians, playing at ceremonies and festivities, and given their own livery and salary. As is common practice today, these musicians were also hired for private functions such as weddings. Minstrels, on the other hand, were often employed by a prince or court and considered to be highly skilled. They too were paid a salary and became members of musicians' guilds, which were the forerunners to our musicians' unions, enabling a standard to be upheld and, in turn, preventing less able musicians to work, thus protecting the trade and livelihood of the members. Some minstrels opted for nomadic life, constantly travelling, playing in exchange for meals and accommodation in each town or village. In the famous Swiss drumming town Basel, the Association of Drum and Fife existed in 1332 as evidence that they too enjoyed a well-organised and serious view on musicianship. This was an excerpt taken from a book which covers the subject in far greater detail. The Drum, A History by Matt Dean, published by Scarecrow Press, is a comprehensive study into the history of the drum from the earliest evidence, looking deep into every culture across the world to chart the migration of the drums we know today and how religion, mythology, politics, communication, military use, survival, technology and fashions affected this evolution. This reference book seeks to answer many of the questions as to how the drum became the powerful and emotive instrument that we enjoy today. Follow the links below to find out more or to purchase the book.